co-founder of DLA Ignite. I'm here with Ed Fowler. Hello, Ed. How are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you today?
Very good. Very good. This is AI Transform podcast.
It is. We're talking about AI today, and we've got a couple of interesting things to bring up around some of the nuances that's happened this week.
So just if people are just tuning in for the first time, Ed and I do this podcast. I do it because I don't know anything about AI. Oh, and you've got to turn your.
I was about to say, yes, I've got to turn that off.
You've got to turn your sounds off on your computer. And I did it because I didn't know anything about AI. And what I wanted to do was we wanted to research things about AI and then come on and talk about them and discuss them. And the idea is that two things. One is you can sit back and learn stuff because this is about educating you, but also it's about you asking questions. So if there's anything out there that concerns you, that you've seen in the press, we're more than happy to try and cut through the hype because there's actually loads of stuff going on. For example, before we get to the article, there's been this thing going on this week about Elon Musk stopping people getting access to Twitter.
Yeah,
but what's not discussed is actually because people are scraping it for AI.
Absolutely, and it's starting to become pretty pervasive as an issue. We're going to see effects on a lot of stuff. At the moment, it's still kind of limited to technology-centric circles. So you see the battles about Twitter API access, about the same sort of battle that's happening in Reddit. And Google today came out with the fact that admissions that they've been scraping people's data used to train their AIs on as well.
Was it an article that they've got everything? We've got everything.
They've got like nearly everything. I mean, they've got it's an awful lot of data there. And Microsoft's doing the same in different ways. And I think that's going to be one of the new battlegrounds. But that actually brings us quite neatly into the first sort of point, actually.
This first article.
Yeah, so Valve has, for those that don't know, are one of the primary publishing arms of PC games. They own a platform called Steam, which is where pretty much everybody gets their PC games from. Now, PC gaming isn't perhaps as big as mobile gaming, or it's probably not as big as console gaming, but it is a very large gaming sector. It's also a much higher spend per person. So we say the gamers that play PC games tend to spend a lot more money on them and spend a lot more money on the kit. So it's seen as an industry bellwether. It's seen as something to watch. And Steam is the largest of the publication platforms. There's various ones that are tied to individual publishers, but Steam is pan publisher. It publishes everything. And what they've been responding to is a series of games that have started to flood in, which are either almost whole or partially created with generative AI. Now, in some cases, these are just garbage games. There's like all publishing platforms, Steam occasionally suffers from a deluge of sort of low quality content. Some of the games you get sort of an open source framework, slap a bunch of assets into it, push it out, and hopefully somebody will buy some of it. Now, if Steam start pushing back at those with a simple request is, can you prove that you own the assets that this AI was trained on? Now, at the moment, this is a relatively contentious area of copyright law. One school would say it's just a paintbrush. The paintbrush doesn't have to know where you got the idea from. And like a human artists are trained on billions of images that are from their own.
You've probably studied art at university and things like that. So
exactly. But then there's this other coming battle that's basically copyright owners, often quite led by sort of copyright platforms like Getty Images and that. They're starting to take quite a strong line. And now some of the images have been a bit obviously scraped. So something like Getty Images. You can even see semi recreated Getty Images logos on the bottom of a generated image of fantasy, which definitely ties back to the source data for this image that's been created. But whilst this regulatory battle goes on and law and legislation catch up, Steam has adopted hold on a minute, does this expose us as the publisher or publishing platform or whatever, access platform, to any form of liability? So they've started to push back. Now, they're not saying no generative AI. In fact, one of the games I play at the moment is quite heavily generative AI at the beginning. But what they're saying is, where did you get this source data from? And if you can try a link back, so if this is something you've scraped together yourself, what data did you use? Which is already starting to have not quite a chilling effect. It's starting to have a certain amount of pause coming through that people are actually starting to ascertain, what data am I using? it's also started to rise to an interesting conversation for possibly future weeks, which is around the rise of open assured data. Now, as people start building their own AIs at home, and it's not like you're going to train an AI on a source data. You're going to pre-train it and you're going to fine-tune it. But so for example, training something like a llama, which is a type of open source AI, in the first instance would probably cost you somewhere around $400,000. It's not something that people are going to do, but you can fine train that quite easily onto something that's very specific, like it knows how to write something like Shakespeare, and that could be trained for probably about $400 or $500. Now that means that you can start pushing it. Well, I have got my open source backend as a game developer, and that was trained on whatever the heck that was. But the liability lies with them. The sort of fine-tuning data I got from here, and you now have to state that if you want your game to be included in Steam. Now, Steam's not really looking at text at the moment. They're more concerned about people stealing libraries of visual assets and models. There is a healthy degree of churn in this, in particularly 3D asset, 3D models, because they're quite costly to make initially. So Steam's pushing back on that, and that's, as I say, leading to a chilling effect in certain types of games, but a strengthening of this drive towards this open assured data, which is I have got a pool of data that I am either attesting that I am the owner of, or that I am in receipt of a Creative Commons license or a professional license, obviously. And that's going to be bringing back into focus what happened with the Creative Commons license and why that probably needs more work brought back into it. A lot of people sort of treated it as if it was some sort of slightly sort of techie hippie type thing, but it's actually going to be insanely important as generative AI moves forward. And I think we're going to start seeing that in other areas too. I mean, Valve is pretty proactive. They're very technologically focused and they're very sort of fairly deep thinkers on this. But we're going to start seeing that challenge come forward. If you, for example, are using a generative AI as a chatbot that's servicing your customer service, where are you getting the responses from? Have you created that data? Or is this based on something that you're not fully assured of what's going on? And that's going to be a very interesting churn as to what's already a pretty highly intensive area around regulation and bias. And that open assured data sort of initiative is going to start looking obviously at biases and inherent flaws in the data sets themselves. You might have to say, instead of like the EU is pushing for you to license the AI model, test and license it, it might be a safe to actually it's not so much the model you're interested in, it's the source data. Where did that come from? And I think that's going to be a sort of a lighter touch, probably more practical way of dealing this, rather than continuously reassessing every sort of AI model that's released.
And your second article would there's this article here, generative AI in games will create a copyright crisis, is also part of this argument as well.
It is as well, because I think what that's also going to be, there's a fear amongst some copyright owners and producers that their stuff gets flooded during gaming, and particularly by this generated model. I mean, there are people whose jobs are there to create assets for this, and some of them are licensed out as sort of standalone stuff, as in you can buy and I will buy an asset pack, and other people just work for these companies creating assets, and they're going to face a significant challenge because AI is going to be building stuff that is probably somewhere between a direct copy and fair use parody. To use the terms, but it's going to be pretty obviously based on some of the stuff that's come up. So how to distinguish true creativity is going to become very interesting indeed. And I think that's where a lot of that sort of asset generation stuff, which is an awful lot of stuff, is at pretty low rent. That's going to start being pushed away. The AI will do it. But genuinely creative stuff will probably start shining through and actually probably have more avenues for revenue than it had before. You might be able to license that information more appropriately, certainly to the stock image libraries, but now there'll be this new class of this open assured data that you will license your stuff for. And I think that's going to be quite interesting. But the copyright crisis is coming up because if you, shall we say, spend some time creating a game, and you, particularly in games, they're fairly intensive, you might release it as an alpha in the closed beta. Somebody scrapes that alpha, pushes it through and dumps it straight out for publish. Who was published first? And you've got all those sort of things you're going to have to start to think through. And I think that's going to create an interesting tension between people who generate stuff for a living and people who are more sort of opportunistic and just getting stuff out there. So that creative battle between quality and speed is going to be again refreshed by this.
Yeah, and we got hit quite early on. We put out a blog using a photograph that had a copyright on it, and these people clearly make money out of it by basically crawling the web, finding copies of their photographs that have been used, and then invoiced us.
Yeah.
And I think that cost us £700 or something like that, which is what probably about $900.
Yeah, and that there's no defense in certainly in English law. Like you used it, you didn't ascertain copyright, pay up, and it's something that's going to be rapidly ascending. This is basically, what did you use my stuff for? So at the moment, use is defined as did somebody see it? Now they're saying, well, actually, no, you helped to make something else. So that's going to be an interesting change, which actually leads us on slightly into our next disruptive AI thing as well, I think, which is a little, it's to be quite a fluff little article, actually. This is basically that your home decor can now be supported by an AI. You describe your moods and what do you like and sort of images and things. And the AI generates a bunch of images, slaps them up and presents them to you as here's some alternatives that we will get printed up in your curtains or your cushions, etc. I think you've already created a few of those.
So I have created something, and the QR code to this is to the company that does this.
Yeah.
So I put in that I wanted something based around social selling, and they came up with this.
And that's pretty good. I mean, technically, this at the back end it's a stable diffusion engine. They've got
there's 4 pictures there for people who don't really, but you can get a view.
And I think it's on a technical level, this is a rapid adoption of something that's out there. Basically, they have an API that links straight back to, I think it looks like a stable diffusion engine you've got there. It basically generates a bunch of images, sends it back, and then they've got a fast fulfillment engine that goes out and gets these things printed and sent to you, and you can order samples and stuff.
I was amazed. It took 5 minutes, and you can order samples.
Yeah, and that type of service is going to start rapidly pushing forward, and it won't just be limited to the sort of drapes. You've got an image on that article which shows like a room. The next generative AI will design the whole room for you and then automatically link that straight out into basically where you would get the furniture from and your decor and paintings, etc. But this exposes an interesting area. And we've spoken about in the past that generative AI isn't startlingly good at original creativity. It's very statistical. I mean, these things are stochastic parrots, as we said before. And it doesn't tend to produce anything startlingly new, and some of the quality can be a bit vague. However, what generative AI is startlingly good at is co-creativity. It's not particularly creative itself, but by gum, it helps you be creative really fast. It allows you to explore ideas and generate alternatives and go through rapid prototyping on a conceptual level in a way that's almost impossible to do now without the support of a dedicated human. So there is a sort of a class.
It asked for and what colours do you want at the front and what colours do you want at the back, which actually made you actually think.
Yeah.
But it then did the work, and it took it is so fast at creating that.
Yeah, and these things that literally, this is the tip of the iceberg down there. But certainly, this exposes the sort of that whole part of the economy, which is called effectively creativity or facilitated creativity. This is people that help you express your creativity. Call them interior designers, call them art consultants, personal shoppers, etc., life coaches, whatever. Now, this sounds like that's just a small part of the economy, but between the UK, EU, and Europe, it's about 1.2 million people are employed in this sort of sector. And this sector is now front and center for some massive disruptive change. Most of the time, these services haven't yet evolved, but that experience you had today, by sometime next year, you'll be able to design the entire room that will plug you into your fast.
I was going to say, you could buy a house, put in and just get the.
Yeah, that basically you would upload the plans of your house and go, this is the mood I like at the moment. Find me everything. And then somebody with a clever sort of, they'll call it, I don't know, generative commerce or something like that, or narrative commerce, will link that straight away to e-commerce targets. Now, initially, you could be doing that just as like a affiliate model. So basically, I'll take a clip from all of these models, and that's how I'll power my business. But very rapidly on, that will become something really important to offer from these sort of creative businesses that make furniture, that sell furniture, etc. And that means that if your trade is now an interior designer, you have competition in a way that you've never seen before. and the sort of ability to differentiate, which is mostly around trust and experience rather than necessarily the end product, is going to come forward. And I think that is possibly the first area of the economy that we're going to see like immediate disruption. We've seen some first order effects, people saying, oh, I was a content author, I wrote copy, etc. And they're facing challenges. But I've noticed an awful lot of people are coping that by turning into like prompt engineers and developing better ways to use tools. But this next stage is going to be, well, actually, this is an industry which is life support, shall we say. And a huge part of that life support is creative management, co-creation, facilitated creativity. That is front and center going to hit that right now. Excuse me, I've got really quite bad hay fever today. Is going to be front and center of the revolution that's coming. And what we saw today with that little exercise we've been through is going to be very rapidly replicated. It could be surfaced up on an estate agent's house. How would you like the interior designed and decorated? And we'll facilitate that because it's your new house. It could be in somebody, right, it's coming up for the autumn session. Why do you want to plan your new wardrobe? And how do you want to do that? And that'll be fitted exactly to you, and we'll get the designers. Or actually, you're getting a new car. How do you want to do it? We can package together the lease deal and the car itself. And actually, if you're closer, you can get it quicker. All of those new experiences are going to be powered by generative AI in a way that those experiences aren't at the moment. They're going to be stitched together by effectively a narrative engine. And that's what this generative AI is going to be very rapidly for a lot of people.
I just thought it was amazing, and I can see there's that balance, isn't there, between if you're a designer, you could actually take your laptop and the AI out to visit people and say,
you can use that now as a tool,
and I can use it as a tool, because the vast majority of people won't know or wouldn't know what to do anyway.
Yeah.
But also from the people that do know, so few people know this, but I actually very, very early days, I actually thought about setting up a website and selling wallpaper and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was really annoyed because B&Q bought DIY.com just before I did. It was really early days of the, and because I still see that there's just this massive opportunity for do it yourself and saying, I want the curtains and I want the wallpaper.
There's kind of two ways that the sort of interior design, there's almost two ways. If we focus on interior design, there's kind of two ways. One, it could lead to almost the democratization of interior design services. It's now going to be so much more accessible to get high quality design advice and basically shopping lists and even sort of plans of how you would do it through your house, balance your budget, than it was ever possible before, because you couldn't afford to hire an interior designer. And secondly, to your point, now an interior designer has a rapid prototyping model that they could take out to a client and then rapidly slap it through. So when I say an industry is facing disruption, it doesn't necessarily mean disruption in a bad way. It could be positive disruption. Now a one-man band, shall we say, interior designer has a much greater depth of execution than they've ever been able to have. They could reach out with a name. But it means that certain organizations who were just relying on effectively the process of co-creation are going to be pushed back. And I think that's where we're going to see some really interesting disruption as that ripples out initially into sort of creative and co-creative industries, but then very rapidly into others. And the example I sort of touched on there was sort of about choosing a car. Choosing a car at the moment is a pain in the bum. You've got different financing models, you've got different use models, you've got the finance people, the dealers, the manufacturers. Nobody's really talking together. And one of the reasons you went originally to a dealer is they would help you navigate that. That experience has gone away. Now it's just the dealer's just a really difficult way.
Well, it's turned into a transaction, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's turned into, but now you can bring it back. If you were say something like Jaguar Land Rover, the first thing you'd be doing is augmenting your configurator with much more of this, and it wouldn't be asking questions about how would you like your car and would you like the steering wheel like this and do you need all this kit. It would be asking you about purpose, and it would be trying to engineer a narrative with you that then it could express. Well, actually, the best way to fulfill your narrative is if we got you this car, new, approved, used, whatever, in this sort of financing model. If you waited to get it built, it's going to be here. Therefore, you could save up. If you waited for a while to do this, or we could have one off the shelf and do that. And that means that instead of it being some sort of you versus the system computer experience, it's going to be much more interactive, much more narrative generated. And that form of co-creativity means it could stretch out into some really profound areas. You're kind of looking at it going, well, why on earth would I really want to go to a dealer? Because I can get the car delivered by Jaguar Land Rover to say.
But if the dealer networks, if BMW, for example, or that grasp this, immediately what you're doing is that you're actually bringing the customer closer to you.
Yeah, it's a huge relationship
because you're giving them an experience.
Exactly, and it's
an experience rather than the transaction.
And that's what I think. I think at the moment we looked particularly at retail. Retail has this challenge that's perceived that retail's almost running out of a road because it's focused almost religiously on the transaction. Now, there's some sound commercial reasons for doing that, but it means that it's kind of lost the more important parts, perhaps, of certainly retail at the higher end, which is it's about a trusted experience. Now, we've suddenly got an engine that can generate much better experiences. Now, how you're going to get that trust in is what the brand is going to stand for, the quality of the execution. But certainly now the engines that you could build as a network, as a manufacturer, or even as a reseller of used cars, like a standard car lot, are going to be much richer. And people are going to be able to do very different things. So I think the sort of, you're not going to need fewer salespeople, but you're going to need different skills in those salespeople. They're going to need to be able to tell stories to the same degree or better than the AI can. They're going to have to be able to present and talk in very fluid terms rather than just act as a complicated, frankly, slow and usually very amateurish way of negotiating a finance deal. And I think that's going to get pushed back. So I think we've got some really fascinating stuff coming up, particularly if we look at this sector in depth.
Ed, as always, it's absolutely fascinating. Now, we have our last session next week.
We do.
Of the season before we break up for the summer holidays. Thank you so much for today. I mean, it's great to pick lots of different AI subjects and look at them in detail. And it's great. I just watched the clock and kind of give 10 minutes to each one. Thank you so much for coming.
And I think if we're looking at what we'll talk about next week, we'll talk about that news that came out from Microsoft Research today. It's probably worthwhile spending the whole 20 minutes on this because it's got some pretty profound implications of what's coming. And that's it's called, for those who might be want to look it up, it's called the long net architecture.
Long net architecture. Excellent. We'll do that next week before we close down for the holidays. But thank you again so much, Ed.
Thank you all. Have a great week. Speak to you later.